Hey everyone, thank you for joining us on this day where we'll be discussing about defending modern networks attacks with modernized NDR with Vectra AI, named the leader in the first ever Gartner Magic Quadrant for NDR. I'll be your host for today, and my name is Tatenda Tichwangana, and I'm a technical account specialist and also the solution lead for Vectra AI at CRS. Just to also give you a bit of a background on who CRS is. So there are two divisions in CRS. In one division, CRS is an ICT training center where we are also an authorized IBM training delivery partner. We're also an authorized training partner for Red Hat and SUSE. We offer agile training through SAFE, and we are a CompTIA training delivery partner as well. We are also a cybersecurity value-added distributor, or VAD in short. And essentially what this means is that we are a fully channel-focused partner. So we only transact with our partners and not end users. The only time that we do engage with end users is when we do so through our partners, and that's only on an implementation, support, and skills handover sessions. Just to also give you a bit of a background on today's session. So we will be exploring the modern network landscape and how today's sophisticated attacks are unfolding. We'll also look at how organizations can detect, respond to, and also proactively stay ahead of these attacks. All of this, again, will also be viewed through the lens of Vectra AI. But essentially, before we jump right into it, allow me to also highlight that Vectra was named a leader in the first ever Gartner Magic Quadrant for NDR, positioned highest for ability to execute and also furthest for completeness of vision. So it's far top right as you can imagine. This does rate Vectra higher than other vendors and other various NDR tools which are currently on the market. Today, I am very well pleased to introduce our guest speaker for today's session, Dan Crossley, who's the Pre-Sales Director at Vectra AI, overseeing the UK and Ireland, and as well as Southern African regions. Dan does bring a wealth of experience in the cybersecurity space, having been with Vectra for the past 3 years, where he's played a pivotal role in helping organizations strengthen their cybersecurity defense strategies through cutting-edge AI-driven solutions. Prior to Vectra, Dan did held leadership and technical roles at well-established cybersecurity firms, including Logarithm and McCabe, both leaders in their respective domains. This background does give Dan a unique perspective on the evolving threat landscape and how emerging technologies like AI and machine learning are fundamentally reshaping how we detect, respond to, and ultimately stay ahead of sophisticated attacks. Dan has also worked closely with enterprise customers across different industries, guiding them through complex security challenges and helping them unlock the real value from their security investments. Today, Dan will be sharing his insights into how Vectra's network detection response capabilities are helping security teams to stay proactive and not reactive, and why visibility across your modern networks has never been more critical. Dan, it is a pleasure to have you with us, and over to you.
Thank you very much. Just let me know if you can hear the sound coming through okay. Thank you for that introduction. So let's start by talking about the problem and the challenge as we see it. So if we just cast our minds back, I would say not that long ago, about probably 15 or so years ago, the network boundary was very well defined. You had assets in on-premise data centers within campus networks, and the identity provider was largely Active Directory, which is driven by a domain controller. So if you fast forward a little bit to 2020, that kind of changed worldwide. And that was with the advent of remote workers when everyone suddenly had to start working from home due to the pandemic. And in a lot of regions, certainly where we're working with, we actually still have, our customers still have a very large amount of remote workers. And these remote workers are actually accessing not only the data center services, but also services in cloud environments, such as SaaS environments, as well as public cloud environments as well. Okay, so this is often the case with this is often facilitated with SASE vendors. So if you move forward a little bit, so there is a very large explosion of SASE vendors, and what this means is this facilitates the connection from the remote workers who are sitting at home to access their cloud environments securely over the internet. And because obviously public cloud environments, SaaS applications, and so forth are accessed in a cloud, there is very often a cloud identity, and in almost all cases, it is Entra ID. We often see other identity providers as well. But often the case with Microsoft, Entra ID is synced with the Active Directory on-premise. Coupled that with a bit of an explosion, certainly, of IoT devices which sit on-premise, and not just in manufacturing networks as well. Very much in many networks, we find an abundance of IoT and OT devices. And that's why we say down the bottom there, IT and OT are converging. But what this means is, to summarize all of this, and all of this, as I said, only happened in about the last 10 to 15 years, realistically. This is what we call a modern network, and this is what we mean by a hybrid network. We're talking about assets that sit on-premise, workers that are sitting remotely at home, cloud services, public cloud services, cloud identity providers, as well as SaaS applications, and those are accessed via SASE. Now, the problem with this is, if we go forward from a threat detection perspective, the challenge is this, that there are multiple attack surfaces to deal with, as opposed to the one. Traditionally, we would only have the perimeter to deal with. And I think that by comparison, was a lot easier because you could control the network traffic going in and out of the perimeter and what goes in and out physically. Obviously, with a hybrid modern network, this is a bit more difficult because of the complexity and the amount of attack surfaces that you've got. So from a threat actor's perspective, certainly from a cybersecurity perspective, the risk is this. The risk is that one part of this environment gets breached, and then that leads to lateral movement or pivoting to other parts of the environment. So let me give you an example. So down the bottom there, what we're looking at is, if you just go back one, what we're looking at down the bottom there is a situation where a classical network breach takes place. And when I say classical, I mean, it's still very much the number one initial access vector, and that is a user workstation. So that is phishing email, phishing message, phishing call, phishing message via external teams. We've seen that a little bit amongst our customer base, but either way, it leads to the compromise of a network asset. And from there, threat actors are able to pivot laterally into the domain, into the data center to get to the domain controllers. And if that identity is synced to Entra ID, like I mentioned before, there is a possibility that the threat actors can also pivot to the cloud environments as well. So there's lots of valuable information stored within M365, within SharePoint. And if a threat actor were to compromise a workstation, there is also the possibility that they can perform some type of token theft in order to access Entra ID and M365 as that user. See, conversely, at the very top there, what we're representing is a threat actor actually breaching the enterprise via the cloud identity. And that is something that we've been seeing in the UK over the past couple of months. You might have read about breaches that have happened recently here. And from the information that has been released, it is largely an initial identity-based attack. And what that means is that the threat actors were able to get the identities of victim users largely through social engineering or password reuse to compromise a Entra ID account, and from there pivot laterally within the environment to the data center, and ultimately take the ultimate objective of deploying ransomware and exfiltrating data. That's almost always the objectives of the threat actors here. Right. So that's the problem. So let's go forward and let's talk about what we can maybe some of the solutions and how Vectra can help solve this.
No, thank you, Dan, for actually providing those valuable insights. I mean, we can actually see that the threat landscape is constantly evolving, again, becoming very much complex. So again, If you have any questions, this goes to the audience. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box. We will have a Q&A towards the end of this session. But now let's also now unpack what network detection and response actually is and why it's also quite an important part of the modern cybersecurity strategy, right? So lately there has actually been quite a lot of noise in the cyber world. I mean, there are new tools being introduced, and with new tools also brings new threats, right? And there's also even more pressure, be it for your security teams. But when it comes to NDR, it's not just another buzzword, right? It's actually a real solution to real problems that we are currently facing. So if I were to look at its core, NDR is a solution that continuously watches your network, looking for threats and responding to them in real time. And here's the big difference, right? So instead of just relying, be it on your known threats, signatures, or your static rules and the like, NDR uses behavioral analytics, your AI, and machine learning. It actually focuses on what's actually happening across your network right now. So you could possibly think of it as like your network's immune system, always watching, learning what's normal, and quickly responding to anything that feels off. So what then makes up a good NDR platform, right? There are a few key parts to this, but some do include your network visibility, where again, NDR does see both your incoming, outgoing, and also your internal traffic, not just what's coming through the front door. It also has your behavior analytics, where it's able to build a picture of what normal looks like in your environment and actually spot any deviations at an early stage. With AI and machine learning, this also helps it to recognize patterns even when attackers try something new or evasive. And also with targeted response automation, again, this part is about speed. So the faster you detect and respond, the less damage that actually gets done in your environment. So all of this combines you to provide you that faster as well as smarter detection and response. So you might also be wondering, how is it any different to, the tools which I already have or my customers are already using within the environment? If I were to look at firewalls are quite good, especially when stopping, be it your non-threats. But again, with how attackers are also moving, again, they are becoming smarter. SIMs, on the other hand, also good, but they mainly rely on logs and often need manual effort. So this essentially means that there is slow detection and again, a lot of alert fatigue for your analysts there as well. EDRs also do work well, but not across your unmanaged devices, your IoT and your OT environments. So it's wanted to also note that NDR isn't there to replace your tools, but it's there to complete the picture and fill in the gaps, especially inside the network where attackers often hide. If we also then look at why NDR now matters more than ever, we are also seeing a big shift in how attacks are being carried out. Ransomware has become more smarter and again more targeted. Supply chains are also hitting harder. And again, attackers are also living off the land, right? So they are using the tools and systems that already exist inside your environment. And then on top of that, we also have got a rise in the cloud adoption, again, more remote work, hybrid IT, and again, more connected devices than ever. And essentially, this is why NDR now matters more than ever. It provides you that network-wide visibility, that context that you need, and also that response power, again, all in real time. And if we were to also then have a look at how AI and machine learning is transforming NDR, again, there's simply too much, your alerts and data for your analysts to sift through alone. And again, threats are also moving faster. So AI steps in to essentially learn normal behavior within your environment, spot in anomalies, even those we have never seen before. And with automated threat triage, your teams aren't just chasing every single spike in traffic, but they are actually chasing threats that are most critical and need immediate attention. It also then stitches together the story, connecting multiple events into one meaningful threat campaign. And again, with Vectra, we've actually seen organizations go from months and even weeks of undetected activities to threats being spotted and contained within just a few minutes and hours there. So what does this then mean for, the people on the front line, your security teams, your analysts and the like? So firstly, there is less noise. is again, AI helps to essentially filter out the false positives. There's also faster detection, which also leads to faster responses. And again, there is more time for your analysts and the security teams. And with AI handling the noise, the team can actually shift from being reactive to being more proactive, whereby they'll be spending more time threat hunting and less time firefighting. And that's what makes AI-powered NDR such a powerful ally to have, not just for threat detecting, but for also giving your team that upper hand there. So now that we have looked and also explored the importance of network detection and response and the role of AI in transforming threat detection, it's also time to also see how everything essentially comes into practice, right? So Dan will also walk us through the Vectra's AI-powered NDR platform and how it's protecting modern networks from modern attacks with clarity, coverage, and control. And also re-emphasizing the highlights from the Gartner Magic Quadrant for NDR and what this means about the solution. Then over to you.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you very much. So let's bring that back to Vectra. So as you said, Tate, Vectra is an NDR platform that works across a modern network. Now, if you think about the environment and the challenge that we described earlier, and that is the hybrid modern network, I think it's fair to say that traditionally an NDR tool would exist only on your on-premise network. But when we say we are a modern NDR for a modern network, we actually cover cloud environments as well. So the goal of Vectra, the ultimate goal of Vectra is to give you a very broad detection coverage across the attack surfaces which form the modern network. And again, that is your on-premise assets, such as your data centers and your campus networks, IoT networks, as well as your remote users. On top of that, in the cloud environment, you've got cloud identities, public cloud services, as well as SaaS applications and even SASE providers. So these are the attack surfaces that Vectra can cover our customers for in a unified console. So ultimately, what we're looking to do is to pick up and identify with a very rapidly and very high degree of certainty that an asset within the modern network is compromised. And an asset could either be a host or it could be an account. So this is ultimately the goal. So ultimately, the goal is to detect what we call the very small signal of a threat actor operating within the environment. And we do that with, as you say, coverage, clarity, and control. So let's drill down into an attack example. I think it's probably worth talking through what a scenario might look like. And what we're looking at here is a next level deeper to what I described earlier. And this is the sequence of activities that a threat actor might undertake in order to perform a hybrid attack on a modern network. And this is actually modeled off a real world attack. So I'm just going to spend the next couple of minutes walking through this. We call this here at Vectra an attack anatomy. And what we're looking at here is the attack progression represented on the x-axis down the bottom, as well as the impact of the cyber attack to the organization. Okay, so progression versus impact. So just to walk through this, on the very left, the initial access vector in this scenario was a vulnerability compromise of an externally facing appliance. And this is actually fairly common. In fact, the NCSC, the National Cybersecurity Centre in the UK, fairly recently put out a blog article talking about vulnerabilities in public-facing appliances. Things like remote management, collaboration servers, any kind of networking device that's got public-facing, any kind of web server as well, right? So vulnerability that could lead to a potential breach if there is a zero-day vulnerability. So if we just go back, I'm just going to walk through some of these steps, because what happens there, once that vulnerability is breached, the attackers, as Tate said, will live off the land and bypass things like endpoint security control. So we're looking at the second column there. From there, the attackers will spread laterally through the network and then look to capture more powerful or privileged credentials. From there, you can see in the middle here, the threat actors have then accessed Entra ID and bypassed MFA with a stolen token. Now, I mentioned that before. So the situation here is if a user is authenticated to Entra ID, so if they're logged into Teams, if they're logged into their email, which they always are during a working day, and the machine gets compromised with some form of malware, the malware can actually steal the authentication and access tokens for Entra ID. And that's what this is representing. And this represents one of the biggest risks for our customers, and that is that pivot there, the pivot from on-premise to cloud. Because once the threat actors have got access to the cloud environment, they could do things like establishing persistence, creating backdoor accounts, and then discovering data. As I said before, SharePoint has usually got a wealth of information. Um, most organizations put the majority of their sensitive data within SharePoint, internal as well. And if a threat actor were to access that, it's almost in some cases the crown jewels. But then there's another pivot as well, and that is if Entra ID is used to federate access to other SaaS and or cloud applications environments, they could actually access that. They could pivot to those as well. In this case, it was AWS. Ultimately, the objective here is to steal as much data as possible, try to deploy ransomware if possible, and then ultimately hold the victim organization to extortion. Okay, so what Vectra is aiming to do is to detect the sequence of this attack with a high degree of certainty and as early on as possible in this kill chain in order to prevent a disastrous outcome. So let's talk a bit more about Vectra now. So we've talked through an attack. So what does Vectra actually bring? As we've said it a couple of times now, we can bucket the benefits of the platform. Vectra is a threat detection platform that works across a modern network. Coverage, clarity, control is what we say. So if we start with coverage, what does that mean? First of all, we're talking about visibility, and this is absolutely key when it comes to threat detection. So traditionally, visibility was a bit more simpler when you think about everything existing on premise, but when you add cloud into the mix, visibility becomes a little bit more difficult and very complex because you're not just talking about data that's being generated on premise, we're talking about data that's being generated in the cloud, and that's almost always log data. So when we talk about visibility, what we're ultimately referring to is the capture of data in a mechanism that allows you to filter that, right, in a meaningful way. And that's what Vectra can bring. Vectra can ingest very, very, very large amounts of data. And this is where the AI and machine learning is very, very important because the amount of data generated is very, very, very large. And in order for visibility, for a customer or an organization to have visibility of that data, they need to be able to make sense of it. And that's what the AI and ML actually provides. The AI and ML can filter down the data to allow you to see what is notable and what's important. Okay, so it's not just visibility across the network, it's visibility across your identity provider as well as your cloud environment. But it's not just visibility, there's detections as well. Okay, so once you've got the data, we need to apply detections to that. And this is again where the artificial intelligence and machine learning is very, very important because what a detection in Vectra is aiming to do, it's aiming to identify an attacker behavior. So we're not looking for signatures, we're not looking for very specific tools, we're looking for behaviors. And that's what Vectra aims to do with its detection. So we're aiming to give you a very, very broad, what we call detection coverage across all of your domains. And that's what we're aiming to do with the coverage pillar there. Now, if we move on and talk about clarity, what do we mean by that? So it's very important to have what we call signal clarity, and that's what Vectra aims to do. And that's another benefit of the AI. So when we talk about AI agents there in the middle column, what we're actually talking about here is noise reduction. So you could have all of the detection coverage in the world across all of your attack surfaces. But if they generate too many alerts, I'm talking hypothetically here, then the usefulness of the system is very, very limited. The alert fatigue is a very, very real problem, and Vectra aims to solve this through the application of AI. So we've got ways of filtering down data, using learned baselines, establishing baselines of normal behavior, as well as self triage is the term that we call it. So AI triage is a feature by which the system self-tunes the noise levels so that on an ongoing operational basis, the amount of alert data being generated by Vectra is very, very minimal. I think one of our customers summed it up really well when he said that when Vectra raises an alert, he knows he needs to drop everything and look at it. Okay, and that's because Vectra gives you a very, very high degree of confidence that an asset within the modern network is compromised. And that's what we mean by clarity. Control, what we're talking about here is the response. And just so everyone's aware, NDR stands for Network Detection and Response. So the R part of that acronym is very important. And what we're talking about here is the ability to both automatically and manually respond to contain a threat. Okay, we've got customers that do this, we've got customers that do manual response actions, but it's important to respond as quickly as possible to try to avoid that disastrous outcome before that impact on that attack chain, before the impact gets too high. Okay, so Vectra gives us the capability to respond and isolate parts of the network if we think that there is an ongoing compromise. Lastly, Vectra gives us a very good amount of reporting. So Vectra sees a lot. Like I said, the visibility is very high. There is a lot of big scale data analysis taking place. But what Vectra can also do as a benefit is to give you a view of your overall security posture based on the data that it's seeing. And this can be very, very useful for not only security analysts working on the ground there in the SOC and the SOC managers, but also the C-level as well. We have a lot of good feedback on the reporting capabilities of the Vectra platform. Right. Have you got anything to add to that, Tate?
Yeah, you actually hit it on the head there. But thank you.
All right, no worries. So let's talk a bit more about why customers buy our platform and what they get from it. So again, talking through those three pillars there, coverage, clarity, and control. So ultimately, what we are hearing from our customers is that the multi-domain attacks being very, very key or very, very key risk. And a multi-domain attack is one that spans the different attack surfaces that I talked about. Remember, I said either network to cloud or cloud to network or involving a breached identity. Vectra customers can deal with these threats in much less time than previously. Under the clarity pillar, right, remove the latency with that accurate signal. So customers spend a lot less time tuning, right? For those that are a bit more technical, the detection engineering effort, as you may appreciate, is very, very high, and Vectra removes this for the coverage that it provides because of the detections and the capabilities of the Vectra platform are built into the platform that there is very minimal tuning. In fact, you don't need to tune the actual detection logic within the platform itself. Okay, and the system also auto-tunes itself. This means the detection engineering effort in writing detection rules is minimalized for customers of Vectra. And also the signal clarity, the alert reduction, the reduction of noise that I've mentioned before means that there's much less time actually triaging and investigating alerts from the platform. So that frees up valuable time for the security analysts and the SOC. And then also in the control pillar, again, customers spend much less time actually investigating. And overall, what this means is this makes for a much more efficient security operations center. And that's why Vectra is a preferred platform for many customers, not only in our region, but also across the world as well. And maybe for those that are on the call that do work with managed security providers or are actually working for a managed security provider, we also work with MSSPs as well, managed security service providers, in enhancing their overall SOC efficiency by reducing the alert noise and also reducing the detection engineering effort while giving you a very, very high degree of detection coverage. Okay, all in all, what we found based on a very, very recent business value report that was published by IDC, they found that on average, based on these time gains and these efficiency gains, Vectra customers can actually pay back the cost of the platform on average within a 6 month period. In fact, we've found customers in certain cases able to pay back the cost of the or in the efficiency gains they get with the platform, cover the cost of the Vectra platform within less time than that.
Awesome. I think whilst we're still there, Dan,
Yeah.
we have been speaking a lot of about reducing noise and the like. How is Vectra essentially, applying those AI models to reduce those false positives? Do they actually have any AI models which are developed, which Vectra uses there?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's really two ways that Vectra deals with noise. The first one is in the detections themselves. You see, in any major cyber intrusion, there's always a very, very large amount of actions that the threat actor will perform when they're looking to achieve an objective. And really, the goal is you could detect any one of those actions and foil the entire attack. But the problem is filtering or identifying those actions in amongst a sea of data. So what Vectra aims to do, and the way that we reduce the noise, is by using or through the application of artificial intelligence and machine learning. So a detection within Vectra is underpinned by many machine learning algorithms, and they work on effectively calculated baselines. So what Vectra will do, it will constantly monitor an environment to establish known baselines of activities. Okay. And based on the baselines, what Vectra does, it analyzes the data being generated on a day-to-day basis to look for this, what we call very, very small signal that a threat actor is operating. And we apply that to the known baselines of the environment as well. So this reduces the noise quite a lot, because what I've found with other threat detection tools is that they can, in one deployment, that many alerts could fire, but in other deployments, very little alerts could fire. And the reason for that is every environment is different. And that is why AI and ML are critical for threat detection moving forward. And that is because the algorithms themselves need to understand the environment in order to reduce the amount of alert noise that is generated. So that's the first thing. So the detections are underpinned by AI and ML, and those are based on calculated baselines of the environment. That's the first way. The second way is that Vectra has built in an automated AI-based system into the platform. It's provided with the platform, there's no additional cost. We call that AI triage, which is what I mentioned before. And what that does, that actually, what the term that we use is triage, is effectively acknowledging an alert, right? When an alert triggers, we've got an AI triage, effectively agent, that looks at it and determines whether or not it is likely to be a true positive or a benign true positive. And it can actually acknowledge that. So the term we use is triage. It can acknowledge that automatically. So that's almost like a SOC analyst looking at an alert and saying, well, this is normal. Let's acknowledge it and move on. That's what AI triage actually does. And we found that to be very, very effective at overall reducing the noise, because as I said before, regardless of who you are, where you work, what region you work in, alert fatigue is one of the biggest problems in the cybersecurity industry today.
Yeah, that's quite insightful. I'm pretty sure myself and the rest of the audience will also be looking forward to the demo on how everything actually comes out. But no, thanks for
Yeah,
that.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, shall we let's move on a little bit. I think we've got just a few more items to touch on here, and then we can dive into the demo. As you said, this is a capture of the Vectra platform, what we cover in line with the coverage, clarity, control. If I just highlight some of the key points of the platform, remember Vectra is a threat detection platform that is built for modern networks. Vectra is agentless. We often get this question, how does Vectra capture traffic? Vectra does not rely on agents installed on hosts. On the network, we've got a series of sensors which passively capture traffic, and in the cloud, we can actually retrieve that in a cloud-to-cloud fashion. Vectra can be deployed either on-premise or within your cloud environment, or hybrid. It depends on what your infrastructure looks like. we can actually provide coverage in a very, very rapid amount of time. Vectra deployment is very, very easy, and we do also support air-gapped environments if there's anyone on the call that has got dark sites. So Vectra is very, very scalable. We've got customers that have got over 300,000 IP addresses and up to 50, 75 gigabit throughput speeds on core switches. Vectra has got a modularized components. So depending on your layout, we've got customers that have got sites all around the world or sites in a certain country. We've got a modular architecture which we can use to deploy there. We've got a SaaS interface as well as integrations that are deployed as services. It can be deployed by our services. But the last point there on the left, I touched on that before. Vectra is very, very MSSP friendly, MSSP ready, in my opinion. Vectra is a very, 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 very good platform. It was something that any managed security service provider should consider if they want to optimize their security services. We're happy to expand on that. So just to recap as well, if we go forward, we mentioned it before, it's probably worth mentioning again. We've had a few new people join. That is that Gartner has very recently released the first NDR Magic Quadrant. And this is important because up until now, NDR as a product set has not had a Gartner Magic Quadrant. And what Gartner are doing here is they are effectively saying that NDR is a product set that is something that organizations should absolutely consider. Okay, there was traditionally back in 2015, I think, or 2016, there was no EDR Gartner Quadrant by comparison, and EDR has fully taken off as a product set now. By comparison, NDR is only just starting to grow, and I think Gartner is recognizing the need for an NDR across a modern network. And of course, Vectra has been placed top right and recognized as a leader in that NDR quadrant, so that anyone or any organization that is considering an NDR tool or NDR platform should consider Vectra AI as the number one platform in this product space. Right, I think that brings us to time. Time for a little bit of a demonstration. Thank you for everyone staying with us thus far. So just let me know if you can see the screen there.
Yep, I can see it. Yep.
All right, perfect. So what I'll do, I'll spend about 10 minutes or so just talking through the Vectra UI, just to give everyone a look and feel for the platform and just to highlight some of the things that I mentioned earlier. And then we can open it up to questions. But as you said, Tate, if anyone is interested in any kind of follow-up or a more tailored one-to-one demo, this is something we can absolutely accommodate. Just reach out. So what we're looking at here is the Vectra console. So this is served as a SaaS application, although like I said, if you have a dark site, Vectra can be provided as an air gap within an air-gapped environment. This is a SaaS, by default, it is a SaaS application. And the main dashboard that we're looking at here is what we call the Respond dashboard. So we call this the Respond UX. And what this actually means is it shows us a list of entities that you should be responding to. Okay, so here we've got a list of 3 prioritized entities. And if you think back to what I said before, the primary goal or the primary use case of Vectra is to identify a compromised entity within your modern network with a very high degree of confidence. So that's how this is represented. So an entity could either be a host or it could be an account. And when it is prioritized, it appears on the Respond dashboard. And what this means is you, as an analyst, should be responding to this because Vectra is telling us with a very high degree of certainty that this is compromised. So let's look at one in particular. So we've got a marketing collab server. So this is actually representing that that appliance that I mentioned at the start of that attack anatomy. And this is still a very big risk for many customers. In fact, we've had customers that have been faced with these issues before, and that is a public-facing server or appliance that gets compromised. And by compromised, we mean infected by some form of malware. So that's what this is representing here. But let me just talk you through this at a very high level. So what we're looking at here is we're looking at a server. Okay, so Vectra is telling us this server is compromised, and we know that Vectra is telling us this because it's got a single urgency score of 100. So the urgency score really represents a criticality, and it helps the security team to prioritize their activities. Okay, so with an urgency score of 100, again, going back to what I said about a customer, this is something you want to be literally dropping everything to look at because it would appear that there's an ongoing cyber attack. So what is it telling us here? It's giving us a list of detections. So remember I said before, detections represent behaviors. So Vectra is looking for very, very high level behaviors that represent threat actor activities. We're not just looking for anomalies within the network because there's a lot of anomalies within the network. We're looking for behaviors that we know threat actors perform or exhibit when they compromise a network. Things like lateral movement, and in this case, reconnaissance as well. Okay, so we're not looking for specific tools, we're looking for higher level behaviors. But it's the combination of these behaviors that Vectra has detected as a sequence. So these happened over a space of just over an hour. And Vectra has attributed these behaviors to this host. And therefore, it's a combination of these behaviors, as well as the importance of this entity, that has contributed to the overall urgency score. And then when the urgency score goes beyond a certain threshold, it is therefore then prioritized, and it appears on the respond dashboard as an entity that you should respond to. That making sense so far? Let's go a level deeper. So the general workflow from here is entity pops up on the respond dashboard, and there's a few different ways I can get notified of this. I can get notified via email. There's integrations with other forms of ticketing systems, and there's integrations with other forms of case management systems, or I could be reviewing the dashboard on a regular basis. Okay, once this entity pops up here, again, like I said, this is telling us that there's a high degree of confidence that this machine, being a host, is actually compromised. So the first step there is to drill into that. And when it comes to any kind of threat detection platform, the first thing, there's always going to be an element of qualification. The tool will tell us that something bad has happened, but there's always going to be some form of qualification that takes place, and that's what's happening here. So what we would do as an analyst is we would effectively qualify this based on the information that Vectra is telling us. So first we've got the attack graph, and then we've got the list of detections. So these are the behaviors that are associated with this particular account. Okay. The attack graphs gives us a representation of this entity and its relationship to other entities within our modern network. So here we've got some certain detections. We've got some lateral movement reconnaissance and lateral movement taking place to another machine. This one's called Jump Station 5. So that's interesting. So we know that the threat actor compromised our marketing collab server. They performed some reconnaissance and then lateral movement to a jump station. You know, a jump station is usually an intermediary device. You know, this is very, very common within a network, some kind of intermediary device that you need to connect to if you're connecting remotely into a data center. So these are actually very, very attractive to hackers because from a jump station, you can often get to many other places within the network. What else have we got here? We've got a tunnel. We've got a C2 tunnel, so command and control. And this refers to a connection that is established once a machine is infected by malware. What tends to happen when a machine is infected by malware is that the malware would perform some form of beaconing and then it would establish a tunnel. Right? Think of it almost as it could kind of be like a VPN, but otherwise it might be something that takes place over HTTP or HTTPS. In this case, we've got HTTPS, so it looks just like normal web traffic. But what it's doing is establishing a tunnel, a communication tunnel to an attacker-owned infrastructure somewhere out there on the internet. And what this means is that there's some kind of hands-on keyboard attack underway. And this is actually the external domain from which the tunnel is established. Okay, the C2 it's very important to try to detect the C2 as as practical as possible and as early as possible, because that is always the precursor to a more advanced attack. So just some other things here. We've got we've got some more lateral movement and reconnaissance and lateral movement to another machine, as well as we've got scanning activity, right? So this is typically reconnaissance. Maybe for the more technical people on the audience, one of the first things that attackers will do once they compromise a machine is perform reconnaissance to understand what they've got access to and where they can get to, right? A port sweep is one form of reconnaissance where you're looking on the network to see what is out there. There's various ways of doing this, by the way. In this case, we're only targeting TCP. Attackers will often try to fly under the radar as well. Things like port sweeps and port scans can often be picked up by IDSs and or firewalls, but there's ways of running them that are a little bit more shall we say, sophisticated so that they evade detection. And this is going back to what I said before. This is important to have some form of AI or ML to identify the attacks that can evade other types of controls, right? Things like evasive scanning, for instance. Okay, so I understand that this is a server, and I also know that there's been some form of activity, there's been some form of C2 activity followed by reconnaissance as well as lateral movement. So let me just show you an example of a detection. So I'll go down one more level and I'll open that in a new tab. So what we're looking at here is a detection. So really there's only 3 levels of drill down when it comes to operating Vectra. You start at the respond dashboard, you go to the host, and you go into an individual detection. Remember, I said a detection represents a behavior. So the example we're looking at here is the command and control. And as I said, it's very important to try to detect this as well as you can and as quickly as you can as well, because this is often, in almost all cases, a precursor to a more advanced attack, right? Because you need to have, the threat actors need to have that C2 tunnel. So what this tells us is that there is some kind of tunnel taking place using the HTTPS protocol. So it says right here, an internal host is communicating with an outside IP using HTTPS where another protocol is running over the top of the HTTPS sessions. So very often malware will use HTTPS to communicate as part of the C2 tunnel. And the reason for that is because HTTPS is allowed out because your users need to have internet access, right? So that's why malware, that's why HTTPS and DNS as well can be very attractive for malware to use. And it can be very, very difficult to actually detect C2 traffic without the application of machine learning. You know, from my background working at McAfee, we had an IPS, and that would do some level of C2 detection, but that's based on signatures, right? So if you've got a tool that uses an evasive C2 mechanism using HTTPS and it's encrypted, IPS is not going to be able to see that. You know, there is a possibility that the proxy can see it, but then the proxy only goes by the domain as well. So the way that C2 detection works within Vectra, and I'm just going to get a little bit technical here. The way that C2 detection works within Vectra, it's looking for patterns of bytes. So we're looking for communication profiles that represent a tunnel, because when the malware establishes the tunnel, what it does is continually asking for commands. So the threat actor somewhere out there on the internet is issuing commands through the tunnel, like the reconnaissance and lateral movement, and then the results of those commands are being sent back up the tunnel. So the output of those commands. So what Vectra does, it looks for the amount of bytes sent and bytes received over certain time periods and looks for certain patterns within those byte profiles to indicate that this could be a tunnel. Okay, and it does that with knowledge of all the major attack tools and all the attack frameworks that are out there. Things like Cobalt Strike, you know, obviously Meterpreter, as well as all the other attack frameworks that are possible out there, Brute, Retel, Mythic, Sliver, so on and so forth. Okay, so what Vectra is actually looking for is a pattern of bytes that is indicative of a tunnel, and that's how Vectra can actually perform tunnel detection on encrypted traffic. Okay, so let me bring this back to the host level here, And actually what I can then do here is I could perform actions within the Vectra console. So I could actually perform an isolation action within the Vectra console. I could assign this particular, to another user, or I could go ahead and once I've taken action to isolate this particular host, because the first thing, well, one of the first things that will probably take place in a genuine security incident with a compromised asset is to isolate that and clean it. And once that has happened, then we can actually close this off as being remediated. And what that would do is reduce the urgency score, and therefore this will not appear on the respond dashboard anymore. Okay, but as I said, ultimately, what Vectra is aiming to do is tell us with a very, very high degree of confidence that an entity is compromised, an entity either being a server or it could be an account, and then that then allows us to take action on that. Okay, so let me pause there, Tate, and should we see if there's any questions? I think there's some Q&A there in the audience.
Yeah,
There's a very high level. It was a very high level demo. As I said, if there's anyone there that wants a bit more of a tailored demo, then certainly reach out. There is one question there. Should I take that? So
yeah, there are actually quite a couple of questions there,
a
Dan,
couple of
but
questions.
thank you so much for actually, we appreciate your insights there. So I think before we actually just have a look at this demo, again, like Dan did mention, if you are interested in a follow-up session to dive deeper into the product and also for us to explore, specific use cases and actually see how Vectra can help your organizations or your customers, again, you can be able to feel free to scan the QR code, fill in your details. Again, we'll be more than happy to arrange a dedicated session there. So yeah, probably just getting to the questions which we see in the chat box, also in the Q&A. I think the first one there is, are there any specific vendors that we can only integrate with Vectra? I think with this one, when it comes to Vectra, it is vendor neutral. So essentially, you can be able to integrate it with any other vendors, including be it from a cloud perspective, from AWS, Azure, even your Zscaler, from even your EDR, including your CrowdStrike, your SentinelOne, and the like. So the bottom line there, Vectra is vendor neutral. Then there's also one there, then, which says, can Vectra NDR also detect encrypted threats or attacks that try to hide inside normal traffic, normal looking traffic? Yeah.
Yeah. Good question, actually. So, in the demo when I was mentioning the HTTPS, so just to clarify that Vectra can detect threats within encrypted traffic, and this is very, very important because encrypted traffic is really the norm nowadays and has been for quite some time. So it's very important for threat detection tools to be able to detect threats within encrypted traffic. Of course, there are ways and means of doing SSL decryption, for instance, but this is actually less common than what you might think. And the reason for that is because of the cost, because of the resource overhead, and also because of the privacy implications as well. Certainly in the UK and in Europe, there are regulations around SSL decryption for medical and finance applications. But also, the reason why SSL decryption isn't widely rolled out not widely, is not a big thing, is because of the cost. When I was at McAfee, in order for the McAfee IPS to do SSL decryption, it would actually lower the processing by 70%. So actually most customers didn't do it. And to bring this back to Vectra, this is the reason why Vectra designed our detection algorithms to work on encrypted traffic. And this is why we can actually detect tunnel-like behavior in encrypted traffic as well.
Oh, perfect. Thank you for that one. I hope you also got answered there. And then there's also another question. What are the biggest visibility gaps that exist in modern network monitoring, despite tools like Vectra AI? Right.
Yeah, it's a good question. The biggest visibility gaps, I would say that I would say from my experience and from the Vectra, from the clients that we work with, some of the biggest visibility gaps are across the network. Okay, because when you think about a network, most organizations have got visibility of the perimeter, and that is the firewall, because you've got a firewall there, and you can usually see via the firewall logs what connections take place. Right, not everyone logs that, by the way, because it's very, very high volume, but you can actually see that. Right, when it comes to visibility internally within the network, believe it or not, is still very much a gap. And what that means is if a threat actor were to compromise a machine, any attempts to move laterally are often not actually detected. And this is why NDR is so important. You know, there have been tools that try to address the or contain east-west lateral movement, but it's very, very difficult. And again, I think the only answer to adequately identifying east-west lateral movement is an NDR platform, to be realistic about it, right? And I think on a network that represents one of the biggest visibility gaps, but also in the cloud as well. Now, various cloud services gives us access to log data, but depending on the cloud service, the log data could be disparate, it could be delivered in different mechanisms, or it could be available in, different formats. And, I'm specifically talking about Azure here, and that is that logging is challenging within Azure. And when logging is challenging, it means that visibility is somewhat limited there as well. So, certainly in a cloud environment, I think that customers are limited by what the cloud provider can actually give them, as a part of the service. And from what we've seen in a lot of cases, that can be very limited as well. Okay, so yeah, hopefully that's just some kind of high level thoughts on that question there. But thank you very much for that.
Yeah, yeah. No, perfect. Hope you also got answered there. There is also one. In terms of machine learning, what data does Vectra use to train the solution in order to detect normal versus abnormal network traffic? And I think with this one, I'll probably just take it. So Vectra trains its machine learning models by essentially using the network metadata, right? So that includes be it your flow data, your DNS, your authentication logs, and also your behavioral baselines, right? So any typical patterns of a user or a device activity. And essentially by learning what's normal in an environment, it will then be able to actually detect any deviations and even any potential threats, such as, again, like Dan did mention, your lateral movements, any privilege anomaly, and the like there as well. But essentially, Vectra does make use of your network metadata, your behavioral baselines to essentially train the machine learning, right? But thank you for that one. So with AI driving NDR capabilities, how does then Vectra handle false positives, especially in complex enterprise environments, right? Um, would you also mind taking that one there, Dan?
Yeah, no worries, no worries. It's a good question, and I think the challenge of false positives is absolutely a very real challenge when it comes to threat detection tools. And what we're talking about when we mean false positives, we're talking about an alert that gets generated based on business as usual activities. Okay, and the reason that this happens, the reason that this is such a big problem is because exactly like you said in the question, every environments are very, very complex. There's cloud services, there's networks, there's people working remotely. We talked about that before, right? But also every environment's different. So the protocols and the applications and the users on one network are completely different to users on another network. So it's very, very difficult when it comes to detection rules to write one that can fit all environments. In fact, it's almost impossible, I would say, to do that without some level of tuning, right? And the way that Vectra actually deals with this is through the application of artificial intelligence and machine learning. That's the only way that you can actually deal with this. So, really, as I said before, the two ways of doing this is by doing some level of baselining on the environment, first of all, to establish what is normal behavior for that particular environment. And second of all, the AI triage, which is like the AI agent that's built into the platform that automatically acknowledges alerts that it deems to be false positives. So there's two ways there that Vectra can reduce the false positives. And from the feedback that we get and the analysis that we do, Vectra can do that very, very accurately as well.
So perfect. Thank you for that, Dan. There's also this one. Has Vectra replaced any other AI platforms for being a better solution? And does Vectra has clients within the Eastern African regions? I will take. Well, you can take it. Go for it.
Yeah, I mean, like we've got competitors in the NDR space. Without going into too much detail, I think that very commonly we get Darktrace customers who are interested in our platform, and we're more than happy to talk through that and talk about the experience of other customers that have moved away from other platforms like Darktrace. Immediately in the Eastern African region, we do have plans which I can't really share now, but also we do have the likes of CRS here that we work very, very closely with in order to deliver our platform and services to that particular region. Anything you want to add to that?
Yep. So I was also going to add, especially within the regions, we do have a couple customers who are currently running the POC and also are actually looking at displacing Vectra's competitors there. So in terms of the performance, customers also exploring Vectra and moving away from what they're currently using. Yes, there has actually been quite a huge shift when it comes to that there as well. But thank you for that. And then we also do have another question here. How does Vectra AI distinguish between legitimate user activity and malicious impersonation using stolen credentials? Right. So legitimate user activity and malicious impersonation using stolen credentials.
Yeah, I mean, this is honestly, this is a tough one, and this is actually the reason, in my opinion, this is the reason why cloud breaches are so prevalent and so so impactful. And this is part of the reason why we're seeing cloud breaches even across the world and here in the UK this year. And that is because it is very, very difficult to discern the behavior of an account if the username password has been compromised to discern the behavior of that account from a normal user, right? Because they just logged in as normal. How can you tell that account is actually compromised? The way that Vectra deals with that, it looks for the behaviors, known behaviors that threat actors would undertake once they've compromised that account. Like I said, adding persistence, manipulating resources within the cloud environment to add back doors, right? Manipulating credentials and generating credentials, trying to escalate privileges by adding yourself to groups and performing reconnaissance. These are the types of activities that normal users don't typically undertake, but based on the data that you get from the cloud provider, it's not easy to determine that. So Vectra is actually looking for known threat actor behaviors, right? But as I said, that can be very, very challenging, and this is why Vectra, I think, anyone who's serious about cloud security should consider Vectra cloud detection and response platform. And that's something we're happy to dive into for anyone who's interested to learn more about that.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. I'm actually seeing that we are also going over time. But then again, if you are interested in a follow-up session, again, feel free to scan the QR code. Let's arrange that session with you to actually delve deeper into the product there. All right. So maybe also looking at this other question that we did receive. I think the person here heard a lot about attack signal intelligence. So they are asking, what is attack signal intelligence and how does it differentiate Vectra from other security solutions? Right. I can take this one. So when it comes to Vectra's attack signal intelligence, it is essentially it's AI patented technology that was, I mean, then you could also help me out here, developed over a decade ago. And essentially what attack signal intelligence does, it goes beyond your signatures and anomalies to essentially find that attacker behavior, right? And again, this will also then reduce those alert fatigue even by 80% or more. And again, your analysts can also be able to focus on those most critical threats which are currently happening within the environment. Right. Good question there. Thank you for that. There is also this other question, agentless, how does it then detect, right? So since we are saying Vectra is agentless, how does it then detect?
Yeah, sure. So Vectra passively on the network, Vectra passively monitors network traffic, so out of line. So for the network engineers who are still listening in, Vectra will typically connect to either a packet broker, a network tap, or more commonly a span port on a switch. Okay, so the Vectra sensors sit out of line and listen to the network traffic. When it comes to cloud collection, we are interested in log data and we can collect that via our own cloud tenants. So we do a cloud to cloud collection. So typically a customer would only need to consent to the collection of their log data. So this is why Vectra is agentless, because we sit out of line and also we collect your cloud log data, right? And based on that network traffic and that cloud log data, that is run through our detection algorithms to identify those threats.
Perfect. No, thank you for that. Thank you for that. We do have quite a few questions here. But what are some of the common signs or behaviors on the network that Vectra AI NDR might flag as suspicious, even if they seem normal to us as humans? Right. So there are some cases where
Yeah.
even when your team internally is working on a host and then Vectra flags it as something malicious, how does it then differentiate? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So, some of the common behaviors that Vectra might flag as suspicious is tunnel behavior. So I talked about tunnel behavior before and the way that it works on encrypted traffic, right? This actually does get triggered by legitimate applications because you've got business applications, you've got chat tools, and so on and so forth. It looks like it's a tunnel, but because we don't decrypt the traffic, we don't know that for certain. Right. So this is why AI triage and also entity prioritization is important because it's important just not to take that singular detection, but you look at the sequence of detections that represent the attack. Okay, so the common ones that we actually see, well, there's a few of them actually. So tunnel behavior, occasionally we get things like lateral movement, and that's because you get software updates taking place and you get like, yeah, so some kind of management, some kind of automated management taking place via, endpoint management tools, right? That could trigger some kind of lateral movement detection. Of course, if you've got vulnerability scanners, that would actually, of course, trigger detections within Vectra. And then other ones, sometimes you get like applications attempting to authenticate that could trigger either reconnaissance or even brute force detections. We've seen that before as well. But as I said, the platform is auto-tuning. So if something triggers a lot within the environment, the AI agent will more likely determine it to be benign and automatically filter that out.
100%. Thanks for that, Dan. There is also one question, one last question.
Yeah.
How does CRS help clients operationalize the insights from Vector's platform? Is there a typical workflow from alert to action? So this actually just then depends on whether the customer is also going to take Vectra, whether it's a managed service. But then again, in terms of support, you will be guaranteed full support with the team CRS. We do have a team of engineers who can essentially be able to actually alert in those critical situations there. So you don't have to worry in those scenarios. And then we also do have this question: are you offering this as a SaaS managed service as well? So the answer is yes. So there is also that option for managed service as a SaaS. So with that cloud-based deployment, again, we can also offer managed services as well. All right. But then this should be it. I think I've gone through all the questions here. If you do have any further questions, feel free again to scan the QR code. Feel free to also connect with any CRS team members. We'll be more than happy to also engage with you further there. I see there is a hand. was it Prince? Okay, let me actually see if I can unmute you there. Second. So there is one question here. For someone entering the field, what skills or sets would be best hands-on experience with the NDR platform like Vectra AI? So with this, I would actually suggest that you possibly start by having the basic networking skills, especially through even your network plus through CompTIA and the like, and then essentially build your way up from there. Right. But perfect. But yeah, thank you so much for your time. Once again, really do appreciate it. Also, great audience. We did enjoy the questions which you're asking. Again, feel free to connect with us. Again, we're more than happy to engage with you further around the platform. But we do appreciate your time and do enjoy the rest of your day further.